Hey guys, my name is Chubi Uche from the class of 2024, and I'm the second marshal on the 2024 class committee. So, welcome to the eighth Real World for Recent Grads event and the second of 2025. So, based on the beloved Senior Spring event series held over the past several years, Real World for Recent Grads will bring together recent college graduates across the 10 classes to learn from each other and discuss relevant real world topics. This virtual event series will be hosted by class leaders in partnership with the Harvard Alumni Association. Today, we'll be discussing personal relationships and milestones. So, we hope that these are fun, informal, and casual for us, by us events. We also hope that these can be conversational and not just a lecture. So, if you're able to, please have your camera turned on, and we welcome your participation in the chat during the opening remarks, and feel free to unmute and share anything during the discussion portion at the end. Also, note that we'll be recording these sessions to share by email with recent grads after and to post on alumni.harvard.edu. So, before we kick off, I'll share a bit of background information. So, the Harvard Alumni Association, also known as the HAA, is the official association of all alumni of Harvard University. The HAA maintains and enhances a highly engaged, vibrant community of alumni and friends worldwide. The College Alumni Programs Office of the HAA serves more than 100,000 Harvard and Radcliffe College alumni. The HAA Recent Graduate Engagement Committee, made up of the class committee leadership across the classes, facilitates the meaningful engagement of Harvard College recent graduates within the Harvard alumni community. And with that being said, now we'll hear from our speakers. So first up is Jamie Tanzer from the class of 2017, who will speak about maintaining friendships and navigating relationships from a psychotherapist perspective. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm really excited to share some of my kind of insights and tips from my own experience, from talking to friends, and also from my work as a therapist and working with a lot of clients with a focus on relationship topics and concerns. And so I put together some notes of what I wanted to talk about today. And there are kind of four main topics that I wanted to get into. The first one, I think this was also sent in as a question, is around how to maintain long distance friendships. I know in the few years after college, a lot of people are moving, um, to new cities or even moving around every few years for things like new jobs or grad school or family concerns. And so it's a common experience of having to, keep a friendship alive long distance or a romantic relationship as well. I think some of these topics can work for both. I also want to talk about navigating the changing dynamics and expectation in friendships, whether that's transitioning from college to post grad or from like working together to no longer doing so or whatever it is, how to make new friends in a new place, and also how to develop your relationship with yourself and how that fits into making new friends and things like that. So, in terms of long distance friendships, the main kind of theme that I keep in mind is having a combination of spontaneity and planning. And I think a different balance there can work best for different people. So, a question to reflect on here would be like, does predictability make you feel secure or trapped? Does something unexpected make you feel excited or kind of too taken off guard? And figure out for yourself, and then also figure out in collaboration with a friend that you're wanting to stay in touch with what balance will work best for your friendship. So this could be like planning a trip to visit their new city, but then also calling them at a random time to see if they're available to chat. For a lot of people, they find it helpful to have the security and the emotional intimacy of creating traditions together, whether that's like a monthly video chat or an annual trip, or staying connected through shared hobbies or interests, like sharing photos of successful recipes if you both like cooking, or watching a show together over video chat that you both enjoy. And in terms of keeping in touch over text or calls, I found through my own experience and through talking with friends and clients that sharing a balance of successes, challenges, and more mundane updates can really help you feel connected. You can imagine if you're only reaching out to someone when you're stressed and experiencing a challenge, that will have a very particular impact on the relationship. But on the other hand, if you're only reaching out when you have something exciting and a success to share, then that might kind of decrease the vulnerability and the ability to lean on each other when you need. So sharing a balance of those things and then also just having those mundane moments, I think is one of the best ways to maintain a sense of emotional connection throughout a long distance friendship. I also wanted to touch on, like I said, navigating the changing dynamics and expectations. So I know from experience, it can be pretty painful to go from being able to drop into someone's common room or study together in the dining hall most nights to having to schedule a phone call or not being able to talk for days or weeks at a time. So here I really have two tips. One is just to have compassion for yourself that these changes are hard and explore either, journaling, discussing your emotions, either with these friends or with other supports in your life, without criticizing or asking for a change, just kind of commiserating that the situation is difficult. And also, rather than trying to keep things exactly the same, accept that this is a new normal and a new phase of life. You might not feel as close and as connected, but by accepting that and acknowledging that change, it helps you avoid the distress of staying stuck, kind of in a judgment of wishing that things were different. It allows you to more smoothly move into a new phase and kind of make the most of it. I also wanted to touch a little bit on making new friends. I know there's a lot of tips out there, so some of these might feel familiar or redundant, but I did want to touch on this because I think it's really important. I think for each person, it's going to look a little different, but some options here that I found helpful are to leverage mutual friend networks. This can be a great way to kind of be set up for success if someone who knows both parties can make a guess that they'll get along. And also, if someone knows that both people are kind of interested in making new connections. I think a challenge that is easy to run into is like you meet someone, they seem cool, but they've been living in a place for a long time and they don't seem that enthusiastic about investing in new friendships. So sometimes if you already know through a friend, like, okay, this person's also new to town, they're also looking for new people, then that can eliminate that hurdle. Another aspect here is like, don't be afraid to be vulnerable and let people know that you're trying to make new friends. And remember that it's a really normal position to be in. It doesn't say anything negative about you that you move to a new city and you don't automatically know everyone and feel totally established. In terms of some more practical aspects as well, I found it can be really helpful to look for recurring events relating to your interests. So, something where you don't have to make a snap judgment of meeting someone once and thinking, do I like this person? Do I not get along with this person? Do I want to pursue a friendship here? But something where it takes the pressure off a little bit and meets, every week or some frequency like a sports league, a choir, a class relating to like learning a language or martial arts or painting or whatever it is. But that gives you a little bit more of a chance um, to kind of let things play out and not feel rushed. If you are going to a one-off event that seems exciting for you, just keep in mind you'll likely need to be more outgoing and willing to follow up on an initial interest by, asking for someone's number or figuring out a way to keep the momentum going in that new friendship. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is developing a relationship with yourself. And this can be a really helpful way to not expend so much energy on keeping in touch with friends, trying to make new friends, but losing touch with your own self care. So explore how you feel about constraints on your time, your new work schedule. How do you like to divide your time and energy between different things? Allow yourself time rather than investing in relationships to just explore your own hobbies and interests and lean into the fact that being alone some of the time doesn't have to be lonely. Often loneliness comes, I think, from boredom. So having a menu of activities that charge different batteries, like taking care of your body, your spirituality, your creativity, your intellectual side, can also help you bridge that gap. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you found some of that helpful.
Thank you, Jamie. So next we're gonna move on to Marina. So Marina will be our next speaker, Marina Chan from the class 2015, who will speak about general mindsets and focusing on what really matters with wedding planning, moving, and balancing work with personal life. Marina, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tubi. And thanks for the Alumni Association for putting this on. I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit about wedding planning, which is something that I volunteered to talk about because my fiance and I are in the midst of it right now, actually. But I also realize that probably not everyone is going to be um, in the same spot. So I figured that maybe I could share a couple of lessons that we've learned throughout this process that at least I think have been relevant to my life outside of wedding planning as well. So I guess the first thing, I had two things that I thought could be relevant, which is the first being that I think progress when it comes to wedding planning, to me, originally, I thought it looked a lot like checking things off a to-do list. But I think when I actually got into the midst of it, I realized that, and looking back, I think progress is actually learning a lot about the entire process and not just about getting things done. I find a lot of satisfaction in being able to check things off a to-do list and feeling like that is what it means to be productive. But I think one thing that I realized is that when my fiance and I were both doing this, we were obviously both doing this for the first time. And I think just not knowing what was right or wrong, or when we were reaching out to vendors, was this reasonable or not? And I think I was very hard on myself for being like, I thought we would have made more progress at this point, and like I was looking forward to being able to check everything off. Um, but instead, I think we've learned a lot about the process of putting together an event for a large group of people. And I think it's also been just a good time for us to learn a little bit about ourselves and how we work better together. And so I view that as a lot of progress through this process as well. And then I think the second thing is that in the midst of being pretty stressed out about all the things that we need to do, one of my coworkers asked if we were to get married tomorrow, would our wedding happen? And I remember thinking, wow, yeah, actually, we would. I think that there's just so much pressure uh, to feel like you have to get things right. And I think in this wedding industry, there's just a huge emphasis on this day being perfect, which made every single decision that we were making feel like they were so much more consequential than I think they really needed to be. I just remember pouring through Instagram profiles of various photographers being like, we have to pick the right person because this person's going to capture our day. And I think I almost ended up being paralyzed with the number of options that we were getting. Um, and so I think when I thought about it a little bit more, and my fiance and I talked about this, I realized that our day wasn't going to be perfect because of all of the planning that we had to do. I mean, obviously, hopefully, it will be good. But I think that we were excited about the fact that this is going to be just a fun day because of what we're there to celebrate. I think the things that mattered to us most were making sure that we were getting married in a church in front of our friends and family. Um, and that our guests would have good food since food is important to both of us. And so I think one of the main takeaways is just don't be too hard on yourself and being caught up with all the to-dos that you have to do. I feel like this is something that I actually heard quite a lot of going into the process, but I think I was definitely swept into all the things that we had to do and making sure that things felt like they were right or felt like they were perfect when I think I'm probably going to end up looking back on this and think about how much I missed planning when in reality, I think I'm going to be very happy that it's done. um, but yeah, I think those are a couple of things. I'm happy to answer questions that people have later as well. But if anyone is also in the midst of planning in New York City, definitely reach out. I have lots of spreadsheets.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marina. Our next speakers will be Jane Thomas Tran and Emily Thomas Tran, who will speak about budget planning for weddings and taking a DIY approach, changing your name, separating finances from your parents, and matching into medical residency together. Jane and Emily, over to you.
Hi, that's like 30 seconds per topic, so we'll do the best we can. So I'm Jane.
And I'm Emily.
We're married. So we planned a wedding together. We both went to Harvard. We were actually both in the HEB department, but we didn't really know each other at the time. Then we met in medical school. And I was chuckling at certain parts of Marina's story because it really rings true. I think we were like looking at each other and being like, oh yeah, we remember being like, oh, wedding planning will be so special. And like, we will always miss having done this. And we are glad we enjoyed planning the wedding, but being married is so much better. We've been married a little over 3 years. Like, yeah. And being married is much more, I don't know, fun. and planning a wedding, which I would not want to do again. I think also like the emphasis on it doesn't have to be like this perfect day. We kind of called it like our motto was like rolling with the punches. Like we planned a wedding and then there was like, then this pandemic was taking a lot longer than anybody expected. So then we planned a second wedding that was like just our closest family on the beach. And then
different members of the wedding got sick, and then we had
with
to
COVID,
yeah.
like days before the wedding.
And then we had to switch that to a third wedding that was even smaller, but then completely virtual. So essentially the lesson is whatever you plan, there's gonna be hiccups, but it's fine because at the end of the day, you'll be married.
And I think that it helped also, I think Marina also hinted at this, to think about like, what are the parts that actually matter to us and what are the parts that we think would be fun and that we want to remember in the future. And so, I mean, being from like different cultural, religious backgrounds, planning a gay wedding, there was like no set script to go off of. And so we kind of were like, well, what are the parts of a wedding that are meaningful to us? And like our vows looked different than like the weddings I think either of us grew up with. We, you know, we like went back and forth, almost kind of like a call and response. We had, yeah, we just kind of like, and we realized that the ceremony itself was more important to us than any other piece of it, which was lucky since we didn't end up having the big party and everything. We're like, that's fine, we'll do it for like our 5-year anniversary or something, and maybe in 2 years we'll feel like planning another big party. But right after the wedding we're like, nope, that was plenty. And so we some of the things we did to make it sort of like, I mean, could we have spent more money on the wedding? Sure, but that like we were both like in our last year of medical school. We had the match coming up. We didn't know if we were going to have to be moving to a different state or like what state. So it was kind of like we wanted to be cognizant of not knowing what our expenses would be coming up. And so we like did the flowers ourselves because we thought that would be fun. We like got a membership to like a wholesale flower place and watched a lot of YouTube videos and how to make a cascading bouquet. We like custom designed an arbor and we're like did some trigonometry to make this like 3-triangle arbor thing that we then tied said flowers to. I don't know. And anyway, we made it a lot of fun.
Yeah, YouTube was our best friend, and we really took to heart the med school model, which is see one, do one, teach one. Really leaked into our personal lives too.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think also just like practically speaking, a couple things is if you are booking a venue, you don't have to, I don't think there's like a law that you have to tell them it's for a wedding, and things always get marked up if you say that something's for a wedding. And so that was valuable. And then also looking back on the day, I remember I had this like beautiful peony in my hair and I was like, I'm going to preserve this like perfect peony for all time. So like the night, I don't remember, like sometime that night after or the morning after the wedding, I was like trying to preserve this peony in resin, and the resin messed it up because I've never done this before, and it like turned this beautiful pink peony like this ugly color of green, and I'm like crying. I've ruined the most perfect flower in the world, and it's just hilarious now looking back. Like that peony is not what being married over 3 years later has been about. So I really think it's true that a lot of this stuff can be like kind of funny in retrospect, and having some adaptability. And then also with okay, maybe we should, I don't know how much time we have.
We should go
Some
on
other
to
topics.
the
Yeah.
we can talk about name changing.
Yeah.
I guess the most surprising part that was really hard with the name changing was the hyphenated part of our last name.
Like as if hyphens were just invented in the past 6 months.
Yeah.
People get so baffled.
And it's surprising when you try to change it in like different platforms that require like an online form, really messes up computers. If there's any computer science major out there, you should help with that.
Yeah, because so many places like booking travel will be like, oh, like you're not allowed to use like characters that aren't part of the English alphabet in your name. So I'm like, okay, great. Now this isn't my ticket is not going to match my ID. But I think one valuable lesson was start with Social Security, and like that was not that hard. It was, I don't know if they've gone back to having to go in person. We just like had to mail something. It took some time, a few weeks, but it was fine. And I think we weren't traveling immediately, but just knowing if you are traveling, even if you're planning to change your name right away, just book your travel under whatever your ID will be. Cause like we didn't change our passports immediately because we just didn't want to spend the money. So we waited until they were closer to expiring anyway. And like similarly with our driver's licenses, we knew we were going to be moving to a new state, or potentially at least. And we ultimately did. So we just waited until we were moving and wanted to change our license anyway. Most places you just have to like send like a screen, like not a screenshot, like a scanned version of your marriage certificate, like most banks and credit cards, but it can vary dramatically. I had a Citibank account and I had like a Costco credit card and an American Advantage credit card all through Citibank, and all three had a different way to do it. Costco didn't even ask to see my marriage certificate, which was unusual. The American Advantage account was like normal. The bank account was such a pain. They wanted me to get something notarized, and then they sent me a debit card that said Jane Tran, which is like not my name and never has been. And so ultimately I just closed the bank account because I was so sick of it. But for the most part, it's just like things pop up like years later. You're like, oh, I guess I never changed my name on the title. Or like if you own a home, like, oh, and then you do a quick claim deed, or you just decide I'll deal with that later. It's not an active issue right now. Well, what other things?
Yeah, and if you want to create your own last name after you get married, different places have different rules. Some places will let you like just take letters from your last names and create a new word. Some places want you to have like a chunk, which in its own definition seems to vary by place to place too.
Or whoever you happen to be talking to at the city hall or whatever that day.
Yeah.
So I think that was also one of the many like rolling with the punches moments, was realizing that we needed to like we were like busy like planning the wedding and didn't even think until later than we probably should have about registering with the entity for like for us, like the county of Santa Clara, and to like actually get legally married. And it worked out fine, but it was a little bit tighter than we would have expected necessarily. So I think doing that a little earlier. And yeah, and then the funny thing also is we've experienced different challenges with having a new name. Like for me, people just can't seem to comprehend the fact that half my last name is like an Asian sounding name. And so people will be like, Thomaston? I'm like, no, Thomas Tran. Like you've heard both these names before. And Emily's never encountered that problem, obviously. Let's see, what other things? Taxes. That somebody had asked a question about taxes. Our short version is if you have more than one W-2 and maybe like one brokerage account, seriously considering hire a CPA. Like they can kind of like run also an analysis, like if you're married, does it make more sense to file jointly or separately, which will save you more money. Like for us, like I have a small business from before medical school that carries over to my personal tax returns, own multiple properties. And it's like once it gets a little more complicated, I don't know. She's worth her weight in gold. I just take pictures of all the tax documents as they come in and send them to her. What other questions do you have? I mean, what other questions did we have to address? Oh, one other thing. Oh, we have 2 minutes. Okay. I feel like I've talked a lot. You should say something.
No, go for it.
Okay, we could talk about couples matching. I think that was something. You want to explain what couples matching is for anybody going into medicine?
Yeah, so part of going from med school to residency is the match process where you, I guess, match into a spot for a specialty. And for people who want a couples match in the same year, then you would match together through a complicated software that I do not understand. But from your end, essentially, what you do is you have to write out all the possible combinations that you're okay with. So say, if I wanted to go to like hospital A and Jane wanted to be at hospital B as our first choice, then we would
Maybe
put down like A plus B.
maybe it would make more sense with a specific example. So, like, for example, when you couples match, you don't necessarily end up at the same institution. That's what I kind of assumed going into it, and it's not true. You just rank, as Emily was explaining, dyads. So like, for example, let's say one of you wants to be at UCSF and one of you wants to be at Stanford, and you decide they're close enough together and you'll live somewhere in the middle, then you can rank that dyad as your number one choice, like, or something like that. In theory, if you had an arch enemy in medical school and you wanted to make sure you did not end up in the same city or even region as them, you could couples match to avoid being close together, because they don't care what the dyads are. You just rank dyads. So you have to be really careful though, because it takes it very literally. And so you can't assume that you're like, well, of course we'd also be okay with you being at UCSF and me being at Stanford. Like that, it doesn't take that into consideration at all. And I think with that process, it was a lot of like, of course you go through like, where do we want to live? Compromise, like what do we enjoy in the program? We were glad that we kind of started thinking we would want a couples match relatively early on in medical school, like maybe at least like second year, I would say. And so, and we weren't married yet, but you know, we really liked each other. And so we started just like talking about it like really early on, not in any like serious way, but like, would you want to live in New York City? Or like, would you ever consider living in Texas? Hard no. Or yeah, that sounds great, whatever. And then like slowly over time, like updating, like, any change in your feeling about New York City? Still no? Okay, fine. And I think that was helpful because then we kind of had a little bit of a shared mental model by the time we went into more serious logistical conversations. All right, I suspect we're about out of time. I didn't see a warning, but I think we're there. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jane and Emily. Now for the remainder of the session, or for the time being, we'll open up for Q&A, discussion, and sharing of resources. We also welcome sharing of any resource links in the chat. So please use the raise hand function in Zoom and we'll call on you. Thank you so much.
Or if there's anything our speakers didn't get to share earlier, now that we have some time, if you want to share that, feel free to do that now. Sitza, with a question.
Hi everyone. Great to see you all, and I really appreciate all your incredible advice. And my question is, do you have any advice for how to support friends who maybe are going through like a really difficult time? Like I had a friend recently lose their dad, friends who have lost like a job, and I'm just curious if you have any suggestions for how to support them or be there for them. It's something that I try hard to do, but it's difficult, of course.
I can speak to this a little bit. So one thing that I would mention here is if you feel like if you get the sense that your friend would be open to this, like maybe just kind of asking them like what would feel supportive. And sometimes that can feel overwhelming to someone who's going through something hard. So maybe offering a couple of options of like things that might be helpful for them. Whether that's like taking something off of their plate logistically, like, hey, can I like order you a DoorDash tonight? Or hey, do you want to like set aside this time and I can listen to you vent? Or alternatively, like we can do something to take your mind off of things. And so having kind of those options, like taking care of them in a practical way, listening to them talk about something hard, or kind of validating and like normalizing that sometimes someone who's grieving or going through a life event just wants to like take their mind off of it, and that's valid too. I feel like I had one other thought, but it is escaping me. So that is, I think, what I would say here is just kind of asking them, but then giving them some options as well. Oh, actually, sorry, I remembered the other thought I had, which is just to keep in mind that often people will experience like an influx of support when they're first going through something hard, but then often it actually takes them a much longer time to like grapple with it. So if you are able to just like continue checking and continue being there and kind of wait for your friend to be okay rather than waiting for when you feel like they should be over it. Um, and yeah, keeping that in mind as well.
What about a follow-up? Are there any ways to support friends who are going through wedding planning? Because I got a bunch.
Be there for them when they want to vent.
Okay.
Help them do research. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think uh redirect them to Reddit. It's helpful stuff in there.
Yeah, I feel like telling people like it doesn't matter that much is never welcomed. Even if it's kind of true. So don't say that. And maybe if you're married, I don't know if you're married, then maybe it'll ring differently. But what I was whispering to Emily that one thing not to do is what my parents did, which is they were like, okay, how can we be helpful? And I'm like, all right, mom, we built this arbor, we built it in my parents' garage. You have one job. Your only job is to transport the arbor from your house to the venue. They're like, one job, got it. And then the arbor fell off the roof of their car on the freeway, was run over and splintered into a million pieces. And we rebuilt the arbor like at midnight the night before the wedding. I like had red stains from the staining the wood on my hands during the wedding. And because we became very attached to this particular arbor design. And so that's what not to do. But in all seriousness, I actually think like kind of getting a sense of, is it helpful to delegate? Like, is there one thing that I could take off your plate? Or some people are like, no, I kind of just want to micromanage every aspect of this, please. So like back off. Your offers of hope are not welcome. And like both can be fine.
Thank you. We got a question in the chat. I don't know if either Marina or Jane or Emily want to speak to this. How do you prioritize long-term goals such as buying a home, traveling, graduate school, planning a wedding, while also managing your regular and daily expenses?
I see Jane and Emily chatting about this. Um, I think that's a great question. And I think one of the reasons why um, wedding planning has been, or at least felt stressful in the beginning, was because I was also similarly trying to DIY and think about all the ways that I could save on expenses. To me, it felt like something where I was like, this is one day, and I feel like there are a lot of other things that I would prioritize spending money on more. And so I think the thing that this kind of ties to some of the things that I think Jane and Emily also mentioned earlier, which is just like thinking about what matters most to you when it comes to things like, at least for the wedding planning side, like what are the things that you think that you actually need to have and where would you want to spend that money on? And then kind of like set a budget for how much you would want to spend as a whole and try to stick to it. Um, for me, like things that mattered most were like, we want to make sure that there's good food. And then outside of that, we could probably save on a lot of other things. So like we have been also looking at like DIYing flowers. I got a dress at a sample sale, and things like that. And so I think it really just depends on what you and your partner think is most important. I think for us, like things like uh, I don't know, eventually we would like to buy a home and that's something that we'd like to save towards. And like planning a wedding is probably not the thing that we'd want to use up our down payment and our savings for. Jane and Emily, I don't know if you guys have thoughts.
Sure, yeah. I think, well, obviously it's gonna be maybe a different experience if you're partnered or not partnered. I've kind of done it both ways. Out of college, Emily, not as much. But I think it can actually, budgeting, I think can kind of be fun. Hot take. Because you're like, okay, like what's our fun budget? And then if you have like an official fun budget, then you don't feel bad. Whereas I don't know, I can be a little like stingy, I think, where I'm like, nah, like I feel like so often we go out to dinner, we're like, we could have made that at home for cheaper. And so I feel like there things can like really add up in that kind of way. And so like we don't eat out much, we don't like, there's a lot of things that we're like the thing that we enjoy about eating out is like having a proper meal and chatting with each other or our friends. And so we'd just as well like invite friends over or just eat at home. But for us, like we really value our space and we put a lot of like more like time and money. Like we bought a house and we've put most of our like extra money, like we put a certain amount into savings every month into like a brokerage account and our like Roth IRAs and everything. And then there's a certain amount, like almost all of our spare money we spend on our house actually. Just because it's fun for us. And then we don't feel like, oh, like we want to get out of this space and go somewhere else because we like being at home because we like it. And it also feels like we can justify that it's an investment too. And we'll have a return hopefully in the future.
Yeah, and a portion of that also goes to student loans, as I see that they asked about grad school. Also something to think about in terms of budgeting, like how much the loan is going to be, like what kind of loans you're taking out.
Yeah. And sometimes I think there can be like a temptation to like simplify things as quickly as possible by paying off as many little loans as possible. But if you have little loans with smaller interest rates, might make more sense to pay off something else first, even though you might have more little things. And as long as you can get as much stuff as possible into auto pay, we're both in residency, like we don't remember to log, we just have everything on auto pay. Let's see, somebody asked a question, how do you know is the one to marry or wait, someone is the one to marry or the one? How do you know, Emily? Marina, do you have ideas?
Yeah. Jamie's also in the midst of wedding planning.
Yeah, I feel like it's a hard question because there's no like single way to know. Like I think it kind of depends on what marriage means to you and what you aspire to in a marriage. And it's kind of like working backwards from that. Like if you are with someone who has the qualities that you would aspire to in a marriage, then that kind of makes them the person to marry. But that's just like my personal perspective. I don't know if I believe that there's like one person for everyone, but more so like you get to decide what you value and find someone who aligns with that. I guess that's a very practical framing of it. But I think it feels romantic when you're experiencing it. But it sounds kind of pragmatic to say it that way.
I think I agree with that. I agree that it's hard to know, and obviously there isn't like an answer that I think speaks for every person. Um, I will say that I think that when you, this is so cliche, but I think when you know, you know. I think that like at least for me, it's also pretty crazy because I think we started talking about marriage pretty early on after we had met each other. And I think it was just things like we have very similar values and like we align on things that are very important to us. And I think are like in the same mindset of like what we want our futures to look like. And I think all of those things combined, plus the fact that I just enjoy spending a lot of time with this person, we're all kind of indicators that this would be someone that I'm very excited to spend the rest of my life with. Um,
Yeah, and I think I agree with that it's like hard to know what exactly makes someone the one. But I think where if you share similar values, and especially if you like are able to talk about being married and like what that would look like, that's really important. Because I think, in my opinion, I think uh the suboptimal position to be in is if you propose or get a proposal and that just came out of the blue, like you had no idea that was coming. That's
I
an
would
issue.
agree. I would agree. If it's truly a surprise, that's probably not a good sign. I also think like, I don't know, things, I feel like, well, we've been together going on 7 years now, and it does not feel like it's been that long. It felt like it went by very quickly. And I feel like I like Emily more every passing year. Like I remember early on, like when we first, this is a little embarrassing story to tell on ourselves, but when we first moved in together, your eyes are getting wide like saucers. Like what story is she gonna tell? We would like get in some big argument and then end up getting locked out of our apartment. We like lived on campus at Stanford, like roughly once a month, because I would like storm off and then Emily would follow me, and then neither of us had our key. And it was like the security guard was like, ah, it's your monthly fight. Like we're like sitting in the hallway, like, oh, we got locked out again. And neither of us has gotten locked out of anything in a very long time, years. And so, but I think like there are just like so many like growth moments. There's a question about handling the religious and cultural differences with a partner. Yeah. I feel like there have been so many moments where there was a conflict and then you realize like, oh, I see, like there's like a fundamental difference in the way that we like approach the world or assume what somebody means. Like this is like really stupid, but one time we were visiting Emily's parents and her mom like made me this like salad dressing that I didn't really like, and then I said something to Emily about it and she like approached her mom about it, and I was like, oh, I like didn't mean that I wanted you to say anything, you know. And Emily's like, oh well, if you like say something to me, I assume that you want me to do something about it. And it was just like a helpful moment of realizing we had a different way of approaching that and just a different assumption. And so then we could go into conversations with intentionality around like, I am talking to you because I just want you to listen. And like Emily did that to me. I did that just the other day. She was like telling me about something at work, and I was like, well, if I were in your shoes, I would, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I don't want to hear it. I just want to talk. And I'm like, understood.
It's helpful to clarify your intentions with
Mhm.
what you're talking about.
And what you're asking for. And even just like, would it be helpful for me to share what I would have done in similar situations, or is that not helpful right now?
Righty, that might be it for time. But thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you guys so much. This is so awesome. I mean, even me, I'm a youngin, I'm 24, so you know, this is still very informative for me too, as well. But I just want to say thank you all again to Jamie, Marina, Jane, and Emily, and to all the participants who asked questions for participating today and making it such a wonderful conversation. So our ninth Real World for Recent Grads event will be happening soon. We'll be discussing caregiving and legacy planning, and email invitations will be shared with a confirmed date really soon. So thank you all again, and I hope you guys all have a great night. Thank you guys.
Thanks.